That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon these boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs, where the late sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day, as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self, that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed, whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well, which thou must leave ere long.
Throughout ages of literature, the four seasons have been utilized as symbols. For example, spring has represented youth, rebirth, and life, while summer has represented happiness, freedom, relaxation, and young adulthood. Perhaps this ongoing metaphor originated from Shakespeare's Sonnet 73. Some background info on this sonnet would include that it was addressed to a young man. The young man has not been identified, but the sonnet provides essential advice for this young man. This is a Shakespearean sonnet, which is written in the format of ABAB, CDCD, EFEFGG. This sonnet compares the transition of autumn to winter to the decline of life and youth into the old age. It also discusses the theme of how love should be cherished and how it can bring joy, even with the imminent threat of death and old age looming before humanity. In the first quatrain, or the introduction of the theme, Shakespeare discusses the transition of autumn into winter through the imagery of the fall landscape and the personification of the trees shaking against the cold of winter's approach. One example of Shakespeare's detailed imagery of the fall is in line 2, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang. The cold of winter is personified by the phrase located in line 3, upon these boughs which shake against the cold. Shakespeare also includes the description of bare ruined choirs and sweet birds sing, which could be metaphors for the beautiful songs of the choirs of angels that beckon people into heaven. The literary devices in this quatrain help to introduce the theme of the sonnet. The metaphor is expressing the transition of life which like autumn, is fading into imminent death, which is represented by winter. This is the perfect example of the first quatrain of a Shakespearean sonnet because it introduces the main idea and extended metaphor seen throughout the poem, giving a perfect lead into the rest of the sonnet.
Moving into the second quatrain, the development of the theme. Shakespeare alludes to the more unsavory side of age and death. He uses both metaphors and personification to portray this idea. In lines 5 and 6, he compares the fading of life to the twilight of day and the setting of the sun. He says, "In me thou seest the twilight of such day, as after sunset fadeth in the west." The conclusion of the day is consumed with darkness, like the end of life is consumed by the dark abyss of death. In lines 7 and 8, Shakespeare personifies death by saying it has a second self, which is the night. He includes how death seals up all life. This is similar to the way that night covers the earth in a coat of darkness. All this dark imagery reminds the reader of the fact that the speaker is facing an impending death. This leads into the third quatrain, which discusses the termination of youth. The third quatrain, which is the poet's final thought, is introduced with the imagery of a burning fire or youth within someone. This youth is compared to a fire because fire is sporadic and energetic like the flames of youth. However, the next line is much more dismal, for it says, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie. The speaker's youth has burned down, depleted into ashes. The gray ashes are all that remain of his former life. Shakespeare then releases a definite idea in line 11 and 12. He says, "As the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by." This personification of youth's deathbed alludes to how youth will expire for every living thing. Nothing can escape death's grasp. These lines are also ironic, for they state that the very world that gave humanity life by nourishing and sheltering it will also be the end of each human being. We each have an expiration date, for our bodies are not immortal and cannot withstand the batterings of this world's sufferings forever. These two lines, and the entire third quatrain, leaves the reader with one dark theme. Life leads to eventual death.
Despite the desolate ending of the third quatrain, the couplet, which contains the volta or the turn, is a light at the end of the sonnet. Humans know that they are not immortal. Humans accept it and must choose whether to let this ultimate demise consume them or to move on and live life anyways. They must choose whether to love with passion or to avoid every chance of heartbreak. However, the speaker has much hope in the couplet, for he says, "This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well, which thou must ere long." Love, an essential purpose in life, is strengthened by the knowledge of death. People have little time to love, little time to linger on unresolved issues. The speaker is advising the listener to love with all his or her might, while there is still time. Love is the light in the darkness of death. The couplet as a whole leaves the listener with a sense of hope, for love is immortal and will never die. The conclusion of Sonnet 73 allows a sense of relief to be established inside every listener. Though the sonnet began with death, which was even disguised beautifully as seasons and fire, it ended with advice useful for all of mankind. His display of metaphors, imagery, personification, and irony led the listener through the discussion of the unavoidable emergence of death and pushed them towards the ultimate theme. Love should be cherished and can bring joy even with the imminent threat of death and old age looming before each person. Life may be eventual death, but love is life forever.